Today marks exactly 2 years since fighting erupted in Sudan's capital between the armed forces and a paramilitary group known as the Rapid Support Forces, or RSF. Sudan had until then been ruled by a transitional council led by Army Chief El-Fasher al-Burhan. But the RSF wasn't happy with his plans for the military and the future direction of the country. On the morning of April 15, 2023, the group revolted, forcing the army to respond. Since then, tens of thousands of people have been killed and nearly 13 million displaced, with the UN describing the conflict as the world's largest humanitarian crisis. Egypt, South Sudan and Chad are just some of the neighboring countries sheltering refugees. Al-Burhan recently declared Khartoum liberated, but the RSF are doubling down in other areas of the country, most notably the western region of Darfur. It's a sign that as the war enters its third year and both sides report gains, a political solution is looking more further away than ever. Today, on the 2-year anniversary, CGTN brings you special coverage of the conflict, the humanitarian crisis it spawned, and efforts to find a solution.
The Sudanese are trapped in a humanitarian crisis of industrial proportions. 2 out of 3 people need aid.
Today, 25 million people, or 1 in 2 Sudanese, cannot put food on their plates.
Women and girls have been raped, gang raped, sexually exploited and abducted for sex on a large scale since the conflict began.
They left nothing behind. They took everything, and they destroyed everything.
CGTN's Daniel Arap Moi looks at the current status of the conflict, including the fighting, the peace process, and the humanitarian situation.
The Sudanese armed forces continue to score decisive battlefield victories against the rival paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, recapturing key strategic sites, including the Presidential Palace and the International Airport in the capital, Khartoum. RSF is retreating to its western strongholds of Darfur, where it's threatening to form a parallel administration. Attempts by the Intergovernmental Authority on Development to broker direct talks between the two sides never materialized. The US and Saudi-led Jeddah talks, once hailed as a breakthrough, have instead stalled repeatedly. And ceasefires brokered in May and October 2023 collapsed within days, with both sides accusing the other of violations. For the population, the conflict has only meant misery. According to the UN, an estimated 150,000 have been killed so far, while over 12 million others have been displaced from their homes. Of these, 8.6 million are internally displaced, while 3.8 million have fled to neighboring countries like Chad, the Central African Republic, Egypt, Libya, South Sudan, and Ethiopia. Meanwhile, over 15.6 million children have been affected by the conflict, according to UNICEF. Health services have been severely crippled, with at least 3 million children reportedly at risk of deadly diseases like cholera due to collapsing health systems. Education, too, is facing a devastating blow. Schools remain closed across many regions, with 17 million children out of school. And on the economic front, according to the World Bank, Sudan's economy was expected to contract by 15.1% last year, with a modest recovery projected for 2025 if peace is restored this year. But for the millions, this only adds to their already dire circumstances. Daniel Arap Moi, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
CGTN's Wokis Tanyabwa looks back at the events that brought Sudan to this point.
On April 15, 2023, violent clashes broke out between Sudan's army and the RSF. It was yet another chapter in a conflict that had been simmering in the country for years. In 2019, popular protests brought the regime of President Omar al-Bashir, who had ruled for 3 decades, to its knees. The removal of the long-term leader initially sparked optimism for a return to civilian rule. But then, Sudan's army and the RSF seized joint control of the state. On one side stood the Sudanese armed forces under General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. On the other, the RSF, a collection of militias who followed General Mohamed Hamdan Dagalo, known as Hemedti. After agreeing to cede power to a civilian government, they defaulted on the deal and retook the reins of power in 2021. But 2 years later, they turned against each other. The resulting conflict has displaced millions, triggered political and economic turmoil, and reignited intercommunal disputes. Efforts to secure a lasting solution are yet to bear fruit. However, the Sudanese army recaptured Sudan's capital, Khartoum, in March in what is seen as a major victory. But outside the capital, the conflict rages on. Bulkis Anyabwa, CGTN.
The armed forces have been making advances in the center of the country, most notably in and around the capital, Khartoum. Earlier this month, the RSF conceded its forces had left the area following a near 2-year occupation. Many residents of Khartoum who had fled the capital in 2023 are now returning. CGTN's Joy Kirukijuma has more.
In September last year, Sudan's army launched a major campaign in Khartoum to reclaim territories held by the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces. The RSF had controlled most of the capital since the war erupted in April of 2023. The tide began shifting in mid-January when the army announced the capture of Wad Madani, the closest major city to Khartoum and the capital of Gezira state. Residents took to the streets in celebration as army soldiers took control of the key city. Then, in late January, Sudan's army announced it had broken a record 21-month-long siege by the RSF on its headquarters in Khartoum. The RSF had shelled the headquarters heavily in the early days of fighting, but several attempts to storm the compound were repelled by army forces. The biggest gain before reclaiming Khartoum came earlier this month when the army stormed the presidential palace, taking back what was the seat of government before the war. The army-aligned government had been forced to move to Port Sudan on the Red Sea after the RSF seized control of the capital early in the conflict. Its recent wins signal a major shift in the conflict in which the army has long been on the back foot after nearly 2 years of fighting. Joy Kirukijuma, CGTN.
However, the Rapid Support Forces is far from defeated and continue to hold large parts of western and southern Sudan, where it has threatened to form a parallel government. And in a dramatic turn of events, reports today indicate that it has finally taken the strategic city of El-Fasher, the capital of North Darfur, after a long siege. The development has raised concerns of a worsening humanitarian crisis. CGTN's Daniel Arap Moy brings us more.
The siege of El-Fasher began in April 2024, a year after conflict erupted in Sudan. According to the UN, the siege has cut off food, water and medical supplies.
2 years of this brutal and senseless conflict must be a wake-up call to the parties to lay down their weapons and for the international community to act.
The RSF last week launched fresh attacks on El-Fasher and the nearby displacement camps of Zamzam and Abu Shuk. Data from the UN's International Organization for Migration indicate that at least 300 civilians have been killed and over 400,000 displaced from the camps.
There are also growing concerns about the hostilities escalating and expanding to new areas, including in Kordofan, Blue Nile and Northern State, and the devastating impact for the civilian population who have already endured 2 years of conflict.
Zamzam is among the areas where the UN has confirmed famine. While the Sudanese government has not acknowledged famine in the country, it has urged the UN to intervene in El-Fasher to save civilians from starvation. Many are watching closely, hoping that El-Fasher can soon find its way back to the stability and safety of its residents. Daniel Arap Moy, CGTN.
Our correspondent Naba Muhyiddin has been covering the conflict since it broke out. She now joins us live from Port Sudan, where she was forced to relocate from the capital, Khartoum. Naba, we are receiving reports that the RSF has taken over the city of El-Fasher in North Darfur State. Has this been confirmed?
Actually, Tinina, it's not confirmed yet, but some military sources told us that there is escalation on the ground, and RSF is largely controlling El-Fasher, and we are awaiting a formal announcement on that. So right now there is no confirmation. We also contacted people on the ground, people who said the situation is calmer right now in El-Fasher, but not in displacement camps. But because the RSF has been trying to control El-Fasher since May 2024, or even before May, in the latest April 2024.
All right, we've lost Naba, but we'll try and reconnect with her in a short while so we can get some more insights on that story. Now, let's move on with this. And so 2 years into the conflict, and much has changed politically in the meantime. As we mentioned earlier, the RSF still has plans to form a parallel government for the areas it controls in the south and west. But the army, which had switched its capital to Port Sudan, is reported to be making new plans for government now that the traditional capital Khartoum has been retaken. CGTN's David Mbidi tells us more.
On the battlefield, Sudan's conflict has unleashed death and destruction, and in the nation's power structure, it has sparked turmoil and suspense. The military stalemate was shattered in recent weeks as the Sudanese armed forces wrestled back the nation's capital, Khartoum, from RSF rivals. Ahead of the offensive, Sudan's army chief announced plans to form a caretaker government once the nation's seat of power was back in the army's grasp.
We are seeking to form a government in the coming period to complete the transition missions, a caretaker government or a war government, which will be helpful for us to accomplish remaining military work.
Early in the war, the army-led government was forced to decamp to Port Sudan in the country's far east after RSF fighters overran state institutions in Khartoum. Analysts say the army's recent victories bring them closer to realizing its political goals, which include laying the groundwork for a broader political transition and preparing the country for elections.
In the coming period, the country needs a civilian government to manage the country's security, assist the military establishment in military operations, and achieve stability. This civilian government must be broadly agreed upon by the Sudanese people, political forces, and various national forces.
The RSF, however, still has a stronghold in the vast western Darfur region. In February, it announced plans to form a parallel government and proceeded to sign a charter with about 18 allied movements in neighboring Kenya.
This is a nationalistic call to lay a proper foundation for Sudan, a new Sudan that is vibrant, that can also compete internationally, and a peaceful solution is always better than a violent one.
But plans to install an administration within RSF-controlled territories have been held up. Meanwhile, Sudan's army chief has ruled out any possibility of reconciliation with the RSF, saying the war will continue until the paramilitary forces disarm and surrender. These developments signify that there is no easy or quick resolution for Sudan's conflict as it enters its third year. David Mbidi, CGTN.
We'd be sleeping at night, and RSF will break into our houses. It was common for people to get shot while they were in their home.
Our house got burnt, and I could only save my girls, and we had nothing.
Many states in Sudan have become war zones.
The conflict has not stopped. It continues. Everyone must work together to end the conflict and rebuild our country.
I want them to clear all the bodies and remains so that we can go back to Khartoum.
Domestic, regional and international efforts to secure even a temporary peace in Sudan continue to meet headwinds. CGTN's Wulkis Tanyabwa has been looking at the problems mediators are facing.
2 years after conflict broke out in Sudan, various efforts to bring the two warring sides to commit to a lasting political solution are yet to bear fruit. On 11th May 2023, representatives of the Sudanese Armed Forces and the Rapid Support Forces signed a declaration to protect civilians across Sudan. The US and Saudi Arabia-led talks in Jeddah were aimed at ensuring the safe passage of humanitarian aid in conflict-hit Sudan, while also addressing arrangements for talks aimed at getting the rival sides to agree to a permanent cessation of hostilities. And while they succeeded at securing short-term ceasefire agreements, the talks were suspended in December 2023. Mediation by the Intergovernmental Authority on Development began in June 2023 with the support of the African Union. The committee aimed to facilitate a meeting between the commander of the Sudanese army and the head of the Rapid Support Forces, arrange for a safe humanitarian corridor, and commence a comprehensive political process. However, this ended without any tangible results. In mid-August last year, the United States opened talks in Geneva, Switzerland. While an RSF delegation showed up, the Sudanese armed forces did not attend. This made it difficult to make progress. Questions abound as to why these often overlapping efforts are yet to make a real breakthrough towards ending the conflict in Sudan. Some experts say the numerous mediating platforms may have led to a loss of coordination and influence. They, however, say there's still an opportunity to lay the groundwork for lasting peace, restoring stability and normal everyday life for millions of Sudanese citizens. Wulkis Tanyabwa, CGTN.
Such lengthy civil conflicts often draw in a host of foreign actors with a special interest in seeing one side or another winning. Al-Burhan's army has accused multiple countries of supporting the RSF and violating its sovereignty. And it's not just countries in the region either. The Sudanese military-led government has even filed a case with the International Court of Justice against the United Arab Emirates, saying the oil-rich Gulf nation is complicit in genocide in the Western Darfur region. CGTN's Robert Nagila has that report.
On April 10, 2025, the International Court of Justice began public hearings of a case launched by Sudan at The Hague, accusing the United Arab Emirates of complicity in genocide. Sudan accuses the UAE of providing arms to the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, which it says was behind the genocide against the Masalit community in West Darfur.
The genocide against the Masalit is being carried out by the Rapid Support Force, paramilitary Arab from Darfur, with the support and complicity of the United Arab Emirates.
The UAE, on its part, has denied any involvement.
The idea that the UAE is somehow the driver of this reprehensible conflict in Sudan could not be further from the truth.
Fighting between the Sudanese armed forces and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces erupted on April 15, 2023, and has been raging ever since. In February this year, the United Nations said over 18,000 civilians had been killed in the fighting, with close to 13 million people forcibly displaced. The conflict is now threatening regional stability. The Sudanese army says neighboring Chad and South Sudan receive arms shipments from the UAE on behalf of the RSF, an allegation both countries deny. And last month, a top Sudanese commander warned that airports in Chad would be considered legitimate military targets, drawing swift condemnation from N'Djamena. An expert, however, doubts the Sudanese army would want to open another war front as it fights the RSF and believes it may instead resort to an indirect approach.
I do least expect to see a direct confrontation between these countries. I don't see them confronting countries like Chad with a very powerful army directly.
The military-led government in Khartoum has also accused Kenya of undermining its sovereignty by hosting the formation of a parallel government by the RSF on its soil in February this year. Kenya denies the allegation. David Otto Endele says the accusations of external interference complicate peace efforts.
You know, what one needs to see is some kind of a coordination and collaboration of a regional, but not just a regional, but an international solution. But the more each side accuses people or countries or entities that are trying to, come up with solutions, the more it becomes complicated to resolve the crisis.
Back at The Hague, the ICG says it will deliver its decision at a date to be announced. Robert Nagela, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
For more on this, we're now joined by Davis Makori, a deployable humanitarian policy and advocacy specialist at Plan International. He joins us live from Nairobi. Mr. Makori, this conflict in Sudan is now entering its third year, and there's no signs of an end to it. Where is the problem, and what needs to be done?
Thank you very much. It's not our mandate or mission as a humanitarian organization to take positions on the political future of Sudan. But our primary concern is that the fighting must stop, and there must be an immediate cessation of hostilities to allow much desperately needed aid to get to civilians who have been suffering for over 2 years as part of this conflict. We're really concerned that with the lack of humanitarian access as a result of the fighting, the spreading insecurity due to the conflict has just led to this prolonged situation of trauma for civilians, for children, for women and girls who've been disproportionately affected by this conflict. So what we really need is for the fighting to stop and for all international, regional and continental efforts to make sure that the parties to the conflict uphold their obligations, international humanitarian law, end the targeting of civilians, and end any attacks against aid workers. And I will be remiss if I do not mention, for example, that recently the attacks over the weekend in Zamzam are really devastating and really show the need for this fighting to stop urgently.
Right, so regaining Khartoum is akin to winning the war, but the army appears to be struggling in the western side of Darfur. Just looking at these events from the outside, what's your take on these latest developments?
Yes, as you rightly mentioned, there is an escalation of hostilities in the west, in Darfur, and we've witnessed some of the worst violence since the start of the conflict. It's really, again, sad and appalling to see targeting of civilians and of aid workers in Zamzam and around El-Fasher, as we've witnessed several times over the past 1 year. And we send our condolences and stand in solidarity with our colleagues who have been lost during these attacks. We see the only way out of this as calling for accountability for these violations of international humanitarian law. And even as the two parties seem to be intent on continuing to fight, wars have rules, and all armed forces are bound by the rules of war, no matter at what stage it is. And we really hope that there will be concerted effort to hold the parties accountable for any violations of international humanitarian law, for any targeting of civilians. And I think the consensus along most of us as aid workers is that we really need this war to stop so that we can provide services mainly to the children of Sudan who've really suffered the worst trauma for the last 2 years.
Mr. Makori, thank you very much for that. That's Davis Makori speaking to us from Nairobi.
I am Naba Muhiddin, a journalist formerly based in Khartoum, but has been forced by the war to move to Port Sudan and report from there. Since the war erupted 2 years ago, I have been moving from a city to a city, from a location to another, and from a displacement camp to another displacement camp. I have heard many stories. All of them are very horrific, and they all share the same tragedy, the tragedy of 12 million Sudanese people who have been forced by the war to leave their homes to flee the violence. They are living in tents, in displacement camps, in despair for almost 2 years now.
Since the first day of the conflict that erupted in an ordinary morning, everything has morphed into an extremely unfamiliar to me. Indiscriminate shelling and airstrikes continue to kill and maim. Markets, hospitals, schools, places of worship and displacement sites are being attacked.
Before the war, I never imagined myself living outside Khartoum and staying for 2 years. But it's the war. You don't choose anything and you don't decide anything. Now I'm living in Port Sudan and coping with all of the changes in a professional and a personal level.
My family has left to Egypt very early, among other 3.8 million Sudanese people. For 2 years now, I'm seeing them only on video calls, something wouldn't imagined before April 15th. But anyway, this is how it is when it comes to the decisions that you haven't made and things you don't choose.
And if I have only one wish to be fulfilled, I wish to see this bloodshed stops right now. I wish to see the war ends so children can go back to their schools and I can go back home. I wish the world never forget about the people of Sudan. Naba Muhiddin, CGTN, Port Sudan.
As Sudan's conflict enters its third year, the head of the UN's refugee agency has reminded the world that ignoring the plight of the displaced Sudanese civilians will have catastrophic consequences. Filippo Grandi made the clarion call just ahead of the war's second-year anniversary. Across Sudan, millions of families were forced to flee their homes over the past 2 years, taking only the bare essentials with them. Most are now thoroughly dependent on assistance, whether that's in Sudan itself or neighboring countries such as South Sudan, Uganda, Egypt or Chad. Those who remained have been living in near constant fear and terror, and doing so without public services and a scarcity of food. CGTN's Sofia Shimechero looks at how some families have been coping.
When gunfire and explosions shook the calm of Khartoum and nearby areas in mid-April 2023, the violence shattered the lives of many in the city and across the country. The fighting between the army and the paramilitary rapid support forces left a trail of destruction, leaving entire neighborhoods flattened and civilian infrastructure damaged. Thousands have been killed and millions displaced since the violence broke out. Those lucky to have survived the fighting say they've suffered so much and lost so much more over these 2 years.
They left nothing behind. They took everything. But we say, thank God.
Of course, thefts, kidnappings, and rape were widespread, and there was intense terror. There were no hospitals, no healthcare, and no healthy food. We were severely affected, and our aunt died of dengue fever.
Even the places of worship were not spared as chaos and lawlessness spread across the country.
Because of this militia, imams have been forced to migrate to other areas, and the mosques have become deserted in some areas. Some mosques have also been used as weapon storage, ammunition storage, and troop gatherings. This, of course, has contradicted the mosque's mission.
Traders too have been hit hard by the ongoing fighting.
The war has affected our ability to import local products such as tabaldi, aradib, sesame products, sesame oil and alva. These prices have increased.
A turning point came in March when the Sudanese army recaptured Khartoum and Bahri from the RSF, and many who had been displaced decided to head back where they had fled from, even with no homes to go back to. They say the longing to return where they belong has never faded.
Despite leaving, there's no place like our country, no place like where we grew up. But due to the circumstances, we were forced to stay away. Hopefully everyone will return. This war made people realize what their country is.
Despite their high hopes during many low moments, the sounds of gunfire and explosions can still be heard in different parts of Sudan, a reminder that peace still remains elusive. Sofia Shimechero, CGTN.
The European Union and Britain have pledged to increase aid for Sudan during a conference in London to mark the second anniversary of the conflict. Britain said the conference, co-hosted by the African Union, aimed to boost the international response to the crisis. Sudan's government, however, criticized the gathering because no representative from either side of the conflict was invited. During the conference, the British government unveiled a $158 million food and aid package for Sudan. Germany has pledged $142 million, while France offered at least $50 million in aid. Right, let's now speak to our correspondents, Naba Muhyiddin, live for us in Port Sudan in Sudan, and Jen Kupstick in London. Jen, let's begin with you. So give us more details about this funding and these discussions that were held, especially given that neither one of these warring parties were invited.
Yes, neither one of the parties were invited, and that was the focus of a large protest that we saw earlier. Behind me is Lancaster House, where the meeting was taking place today. Just to my side, to my right, is the Sudanese embassy, and there was a crowd of over 300 people who gathered to protest the fact that the Sudanese government was not represented, and they were very vocal, saying that the UAE should not have been represented at the meeting today, considering that Sudan has brought them to the International Court of Justice. Of course, the UAE denies their claims of that they're providing weapons to the RSF. So that was a big part of the day here in London, those protests. Now, as you said, the meeting was co-hosted by the UK, the African Union, the European Union, France and Germany, and we heard earlier on the day about those pledges for money. So that's an extra $158 million from the UK, almost $600 million from the EU. And David Lammy, the UK Foreign Secretary, very strong in his opening statement to the conference. He spoke about his experiences on the border of Sudan, being in Chad recently in January, saying that the UK would not forget Sudan and would face the horrors of the war that's going on head on with the other representatives that were here today in what the UN, of course, has called, as we've heard throughout this program, the world's worst humanitarian crisis. Now, he also emphasized that this conference is more about the external players. So perhaps that's their justification for not inviting either the Sudanese government or the representatives from the RSF to the meeting. He wants external actors to come and try to find a diplomatic way to end the war in Sudan. That he said funding is not necessarily an issue here. It's a lack of political will on the part of the warring parties. They need to be able to stop the fighting and be able to be persuaded to have peace for the people there so that they can bring aid into the country anywhere that it is needed, and it's needed desperately, obviously. We heard from the AU commissioner as well, who was at the meeting. He agreed with David Lammy, and Banoke Adeoye said there can be no military solution in Sudan, that only an immediate and unconditional ceasefire, a cessation of the hostilities would be acceptable, and then that would follow a dialogue where everybody could interact. This has been described by the UK as patient diplomacy. So also what we heard was that they don't want another meeting of this type to happen in a year's time. They want to find a way forward and a solution to the war in Sudan.
All right, so now coming to you, what have been the reactions from Sudanese authorities to the UK announcement of this humanitarian aid?
Sorry, Tinina, I couldn't hear your question.
We want to get the reactions, Naba, from Sudanese authorities about this humanitarian aid announced by the UK.
Actually, Tinina, the humanitarian situation in Sudan is really beyond dire, not only in El-Fasher, which is besieged by the...
I'm afraid we've lost Naba again. We seem to have problems with her connection. But just to recap, what we'd mentioned earlier is that the army-led government had actually criticized that, saying that they were not invited. But of course, Jen putting it into perspective, that wasn't really about the warring parties. So the 2 years of fighting have severely impacted the country's health sector, with 70% of facilities reported to be out of operation. However, even those that remain open say they're struggling to get hold of life-saving supplies and retain staff. CGTN's Naba Muhyiddin visited one such facility in Sudan's northeastern River Nile state.
Intisar Adam and her 6-month-old child were both injured in an attack in El-Fasher 2 weeks ago. In the same incident, 2 of her sisters were killed and another lost a limb.
We were at the market shopping for the aid. We were happy and waiting to celebrate. I don't know what happened and what hit us, but in a second I was unconscious. When I woke up, I saw everyone was running and screaming. I took my baby and ran. I couldn't save my family and I left them behind me. I couldn't even cover my sister's dead bodies. We are victims of this chaos and insanity. We are ordinary people who are paying the cost of this war every day.
Adam is among millions of civilians in Sudan who are facing the ugliest side of the conflict. She traveled from El-Fasher to the Adbara Teaching Hospital for treatment. The International Committee of the Red Cross is supporting the hospital so it can treat gunshot wounds and other injuries.
Since the launching of the ICRC program in January, dozens of people have been treated here in Adbara Hospital, mostly patients who have been injured in the war.
Lack of access to clean water is also undermining public health, significantly heightening the risk of cholera outbreaks and other health crises.
We focus in trying to address everything that has affected the access to healthcare and the access of people in different level according to what the conflict has disruption or dysfunction. So we address it by having a response to weapon wounded. That's for us are amongst the direct people affected with the conflict, and also addressing to the other people that are affected because of health emergencies that are coming because the conflict was in.
The fighting has created chaotic situations for medical personnel.
In Sudan here, the war is particular because you don't have only one front line from where patients are coming. You have different places from where people are coming. That is first. The second issue we are facing here is we have a lot of displaced people. We have displaced surgeons also. You have also displaced nurses. So we are, yes, facing a lot of issues managing all those kind of patients. Again, what we have also, the mechanism of the injuries are really different here. We have direct gunshot wounds, but you also have mines, you have airstrike shellings, and you have drones shellings also. This is which makes the situation, yes, very, very particular. Otherwise, yes, the context is not very easy, but our goal is to help people and to help our national colleagues to take care of those patients.
The impact of 2 years of fighting has left people like Adam with shattered lives and families, but she and others are also grateful for the treatment they have been able to receive here, a rare occurrence in the war-torn country. Naba Muhiddin, CGTN, Adbara, Sudan.
The pledge by the European Union and Britain to increase humanitarian aid to Sudan raises critical questions of how the funding will be utilized, considering the absence of the warring parties at the London conference. To answer this and other questions, we earlier spoke to Pascal Cutard, a senior advisor on humanitarian security at Sahan, a Nairobi-based think tank focusing on the Horn of Africa.
The real question is, will the warring parties allow the flow of humanitarian aid? Will they actually change their approach and allow civilians, which are civilians living under enemy control, to be assisted? So far, this has been a crucial point where every aid to civilians who are not involved in the conflict but live under the enemy influence or control have been prevented from being assisted because that was considered by either side as also a help to their respective enemy. So protection of these civilians is absolutely crucial, and it will have to be the parties who allow the flow of humanitarian aid, and we have to see whether this, for once, this time will actually change and happen. The European Union and the United Kingdom have both been heavily involved in Sudan in the lead up to the current war, since the revolution, since Omar Bashir fell. And this is not a completely out of the blue new thing that they would be interested. Now, hopefully this opportunity of the conference will lead things a little bit better forward than in the past. The last standing enclave of the Sudanese armed forces is this city of El-Fasher, which includes, as part of the agglomeration, important camps for internally displaced persons. And unfortunately, the images which are coming out of El-Fasher, coming out of Zamzam camp and other places are absolutely horrendous, where, again, like from the beginning of this war, there is a very high degree of disregard for civilian life, of disregard for the protection of those who are not part of the fighting and who are protected by international law, should not be attacked, but they regularly, systematically are by both sides. And the pictures on social media and public broadcasters about what happened in El-Fasher over the last few days are simply unbearable. It's not the first time, but they're unbearable.
Meanwhile, the ongoing conflict has made it increasingly difficult to carry out proper burials in many vulnerable communities. Some families have been forced to bury their loved ones near their homes or on nearby streets, raising health and safety concerns. However, many bodies aren't even getting a burial, and corpses can often be found decomposing in public areas. Chaumgono has more.
Decomposing bodies fill the street, their presence known by the smell. People will come to us at the mosque, reporting the scent of decay. As soon as we were informed, we will go to the location and bury them.
Sometimes, when clashes broke out between the army and the Rapid Support Forces, the Rapid Support Forces will prevent us from burying our bodies. We could only bury them by hiding, then fleeing if we were discovered.
Trapped in conflict, these ghastly dark graves are on what were once ordinary streets. There's no headstone, just a rough wooden plank marking the spot where the bodies have been buried. In terms of peace, their funerals would have been large affairs lasting days.
From an Islamic perspective, the burial should take place in cemeteries. However, in some neighborhoods occupied by the Rapid Support Forces, citizens have been prevented from burying their dead in cemeteries and are instead burying them in homes, streets, and squares.
Concerns grow about the health and safety impact.
Currently, all the streets are filled with corpses, and we are approaching autumn in a few months. When the rains fall, these corpses will cause serious health problems due to the spread of flies, mosquitoes, and other insects. Therefore, we must take the initiative to bury them quickly.
Health officials are concerned that if bodies are not handled properly, there is a risk of disease transmission and soil contamination, which would potentially affect the water table. But with the conflict showing few signs of easing, there are worries that this burial problem could even get worse in the future. Chaumgono, CGTN.
Now, with production and services grounding to a halt, along with a near total destruction of infrastructure, it's no surprise that the country's economy has suffered greatly. But beneath the ruins lies a high-stakes recovery plan backed by international lenders, which promises to pull the country back from the brink. CGTN's Ian Kenywa has more.
The conflict in Sudan has decimated the economy, with total losses estimated at $26 billion over the past 2 years. In 2023 alone, Sudan's GDP contracted by nearly 37.5%, while oil exports, a key source of government revenues, plunged by $2.1 billion after pipelines were damaged and refineries shelled. Once the bustling hub of trade and industry, Khartoum's commercial districts now lie deserted. The State Treasury estimates the country has lost over 80% of its revenues owing to the collapse of oil and gold exports. Some of the gold fields are located in areas outside government control. The conflict in Sudan has significantly impacted the economy, leading to currency depreciation and rising prices for essential goods. Inflation has also skyrocketed into triple-digit territory, peaking at 213.7% in 2023, according to the World Bank. To counter the economic collapse, Sudanese authorities unveiled a recovery plan backed by the International Monetary Fund. This includes physical reforms, establishment of a treasury single account, and public debt restructuring.
Of course, one of the important issues when we talk about reconstruction and rehabilitation is the issue of financing, because the cost is very high. We are talking about billions of dollars, and therefore these large sums and high costs are beyond the state's ability to meet its obligations.
Milestones include October 2024 pipeline repairs, January 2025 release of the Economic Recovery Strategy, and the next IMF consultation in June 2025. Beyond the numbers, the human cost is immense. Tens of thousands have lost jobs and incomes have plunged. Despite the devastation, Sudan's resilience endures. Khartoum aims to reclaim growth as its economy is projected to rebound regionally by 3% in 2025 once stability returns. With sustained reforms and international support, a path to recovery is emerging. Ian Kinwa, CGTN.
The Sudanese are trapped in a humanitarian crisis of industrial proportions. 2 out of 3 people need aid.
Today, 25 million people, or 1 in 2 Sudanese, cannot put food on their plates.
Women and girls have been raped, gang raped, sexually exploited and abducted for sex on a large scale since the conflict began.
They left nothing behind. They took everything, and they destroyed everything.
The toll from the Sudan conflict goes far beyond the battlefield. As violence rages, the nation is not just losing lives, but also much of its cultural heritage. Historical sites have been reduced to rubble, with many priceless artifacts looted. CGTN's Sharon Baranga has more.
Once home to ancient civilizations like the Kushite who built the Nubian pyramids in the desert, Sudan is now a landscape of destruction and displacement. In Khartoum and other cities, museums and libraries have been looted or caught in the crossfire.
This rebel militia, the Rapid Support Forces, has destroyed everything, including all that concerns the Sudanese individual and the civilization of the Sudanese people.
The Sudan National Museum, once a proud guardian of Nubian relics, remains shut, its collections stolen in the absence of security. Archives chronicling the nation's diverse histories are either damaged, abandoned, or in danger of being lost entirely.
The most important artifacts that were stolen were in the safe room, what we refer to as the strong room, which hosted antiquities that are made of gold or gold-plated items. These were inside the strong room that was stormed and looted, same as what happened to the rest of the artifacts.
UNESCO and other cultural organizations have raised alarm bells, but with limited access and escalating violence, protection efforts have proven difficult. There is growing concern that when peace finally returns, much of what once defined Sudan may be gone forever.
The Rapid Support Forces are erasing the history of a country that is more than 7,000 years old. You are telling people that you are coming to bring democracy and liberation, but you are wiping the history of a nation, wiping away 7,000 years of history. You are erasing the oldest nation in history, erasing its history by entering the National Museum and looting its belongings and destroying what you are not able to loot.
Beyond the headlines of political upheaval and humanitarian crisis, this quieter tragedy continues to unfold, one that may not be felt immediately, but its consequences could ripple for decades. Sharon Baranga, CGTN.